man, stop. That's wrong.
Why? What's wrong with that, bro?
Well, depends how you look at it, but there are 3 relevant ethical theories which explain why dumping irresponsibly is wrong. Well, pollution on an everyday level is in itself wrong, but it is part of a bigger problem. The issue becomes much more drastic when corporations dump waste and hazardous byproduct on an industrial level. This will be the main focus of our discussion today. The first relevant ethical issue I was referring to is deontology. Immanuel Kant illustrates a principle known as a categorical imperative, which he defines as a global, absolute duty. The categorical imperative applies to every member of society and must be followed regardless of the situation. In this sense, the categorical imperative is just since it applies universally and without exceptions. In accordance with deontological ethics, some actions are wrong or immoral regardless of the result. An act also has to necessarily be appropriate to become applicable to everyone in order for it to be considered a categorical imperative and moral. An article published by the New York Times found that the Coast Guard has admitted to dumping over, quote, 100,000 dead batteries taken from lighted towers and other navigation markers like buoys under its jurisdiction have been dumped into the Tennessee River, the Hudson River, and other waterways throughout the country. Technically, the Coast Guard is not a business and does not have industrial and strict regulations established with respect to dumping. Ironically, one of the responsibilities of the Coast Guard is in fact to enforce illegal dumping laws. Despite the lack of restrictions on the Coast Guard with respect to dumping, they are still acting morally wrong. Deontological ethics leads to a perspective which states that organizations, institutions, businesses, and individuals must all adhere to the same categorical imperative. There can be no exceptions within the different associations based on functionality, purpose, profits, or any other factors.
The next relevant ethical theory that can be applied is consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism, championed by John Stuart Mill. This theory focuses on the outcomes, or consequences of an action, as the name suggests. This theory is especially applicable to considering whether or not dumping of industrial waste is an ethical choice. The negative consequences of such practices are well documented. For example, humans are affected when pollution causes increased rates of diseases. Chemical waste in China, for example, has led to cancer villages near industrial areas where cancer mortality rates have risen 80% over the last 30 years despite advances in medicine. Animals in the environment suffer as well. Toxic waste dumped into rivers causes a loss of biodiversity through the destruction of fish breeding grounds and the killing of plants that provide food and shelter. The list of negative consequences goes on and on. Some may protest that irresponsible dumping results in some positive consequences, namely cheaper consumer products, increased profits, or convenience. However, the prudent observer should take into account the gravity of the negative consequences at stake, including illness and death, and see that these negative consequences far outweigh the goal of saving the consumer a few dollars. Therefore, a utilitarian argument would clearly oppose the dumping of industrial waste on all accounts.
The last ethical theory is virtue ethics, attributed to Aristotle. Virtue ethicists would say dumping is immoral because it is a product of society's overindulgence, as well as corporations' greed for profit. Aristotle notes that man is more easily tempted by pleasures, and our consumption-driven society offers constant immediate gratification. People have spoiled the virtue of self-mastery by way of deficit and have created a sky-high demand that incentivizes corporations to dump their often hazardous byproduct. Further, corporations' greed for profit drives them to minimize their cost by any means, whether it's illegally dumping or lobbying to keep outdated regulations in place that they may take advantage of, as is the case with many power companies. Many of the regulations governing the dumping of coal ash into waterways are over 30 years old and do not account for the byproducts resulting from changes in practice and technology. Power companies, however, are able to work their way around these antiquated regulations and dump more waste into waterways. Desiring to make a profit is in no way inherently wrong, but the greed for it exhibited by many corporations is in excess of the mean. There are more steps to be taken, however, to fix this problem. It isn't enough for consumers to not jump at the chance to buy the latest Apple product. They must not be sad about it or feel left out when they see that other friends have it. It also isn't enough for corporations to operate within moral and legal regulations. They must not regret the profit they lost due to operating ethically. As Aristotle says, for he is perfected in self-mastery, who not only abstains from the bodily pleasures, but is glad to do so. Whether he who abstains but is sorry to do it has not self-mastery.
My question to you guys would be, which of these responses is the best?
The best ethical theory to apply in this case is consequentialism. Even if you could justify irresponsible dumping by the other methods, you are still left with incredibly destructive and harmful consequences at the end of the day. No matter how you look at it, irresponsible dumping causes irreparable harm.